coming up on this episode of Crime Family.
One of many reasons I thought Adnan's not guilty at all is people were saying, oh, he lived a double life. And they say about 2.5% to I think 5% of the US prison population is innocent. I think they told him something like, you already told us you did it through the result of the lie detector test. So now we just need to hear you say it out loud so that they could just have it, have the confession.
Are there any resources available for prisoners once they get out of jail in terms of like rehabilitation or life skills assistance, and specifically any that are focused on those who have been wrongfully convicted?
How do they come out eventually and then be so nice and forgiving and not bitter and not angry? And, and in all three of those cases, all three of them have said that they're not angry and they're not bitter, and it's amazing to me.
So we are here with Jia Wertz, and Jia Wertz is an independent documentary filmmaker pursuing stories that explore wrongful convictions in the name of protecting the social order. She's currently investigating the vagaries and inconsistencies of the American criminal justice system through the story of Jeffrey Deskovic and other exonerees who have had their freedom restored at the cost of irreparable damage to their minds, relationships, and families. Her debut documentary short, titled Conviction, premiered at the Greenwich International Film Festival and had great success on the festival circuit, with official selections at 12 festivals. The film won awards for Best Picture, Best Cinematography, and an award of distinction, and is featured on Amazon Prime in the US. She is currently in the final stages of post-production on the feature-length documentary of the same story. Jia is from Calgary, Alberta, and currently divides her time between Calgary and New York City with her husband and son. In addition, Jia is a featured writer for Forbes, has contributed to a number of business and fashion publications, and is the founder and fashion designer of Studio 15. So welcome, Jia Wertz. We're so happy to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me on, guys. I'm so excited to talk to you.
I just want to say, though, how the documentary was so good. Like, I watched it. I thought it was really, really well done. And I can't wait to watch like the full length feature of it.
Oh,
so I'm
thank
excited.
you so much. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, it's a quick 20-minute watch, but it's funny because I find it heartbreaking and heartwarming at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really interesting. So thanks for letting us watch that, even though we're in Canada.
Oh my God. Thank you for taking the time to watch it.
Yeah, we all really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah. Okay, so as AJ mentioned, you had a successful career in the fashion industry, or you still do, like more on the corporate side of things. And you started your own company, Studio 15. And you have a commerce/fashion column in Forbes magazine. So you had all that, and you decided to like completely jump to a new career. I know that you had mentioned in previous interviews that the story of Reuben Carter and his book, The 16th Round, was kind of your eye-opener to the reality of wrongful convictions. And you're also very familiar with the Adnan Syed case. And so cases like this are really fascinating to everyone who is interested in true crime, but not everyone decides to kind of take that drastic shift and start a new career as a result of kind of learning about these things. So can you talk a little bit about what made you make that jump from a corporate fashion career to a career committed to helping those who have been wrongfully convicted?
Yeah, for sure. I think you're right. A lot of people don't do that, especially, at the age of 40, which is when I did it. But oddly enough, if you talk to Rabia Chowdhury, Adnan's friend, she'll tell you about hundreds of people who have written to her and she's talked to have changed their careers as a result of hearing Adnan's story. So I'm definitely not the only one, that's for sure. But for me, it kind of happened a little bit organically because I listened to Serial, and like everybody else, and I think like you guys were appalled, what happened to Adnan, and felt like, how could this be? It's entertainment for everybody who's listening, but it's also someone's real life. And this kid is not even a kid anymore, and he's still in prison for something he didn't do. And it was just so infuriating. And I thought, I want to do something to help. But like most people who want to help any kind of bigger cause, you just don't know what to do. You're a single person. You don't, like, sure, you could donate a couple $100 or you could volunteer your time. But other than that, it's just so hard to figure out what you can do that would make a bigger impact. And I was kind of in that exact same mindset for a long time, like 4 or 5 years. I was like, what can I do? And initially, when Serial ended, I thought, at least I can raise some money for Adnan's legal defense fund. And so initially what I did, it's a really funny story, actually. I was always on Rabia's Twitter, and I was constantly like, what are the updates on Adnan? What is happening? And I didn't know Rabia at the time, and I would just tweet her all the time, like half the world was seemed to be doing, like, what's an update? How is Adnan? Have you talked to him? What's happening with his case? And I noticed after a little while that right after or before my tweets was another woman's tweets, and she was often asking the same things I was asking. And one time I noticed she wrote, I'm in New York, please let me know if there's anything I can do. And I had just written, I'm in New York, please let me know I'm not far, like if there's anything I can do. And I noticed that she wrote that, and I was like, wait a minute, she's in New York and I can't plan a fundraiser all by myself. And I wanted to plan a fundraiser. So I tweeted her, and her name was Marion. I tweeted her and said, I noticed that you're here too, and you had written to Rabia that you wanted to help. How about we get together and try and put our heads together and do something? And she told me after the fact, we met for coffee, and now she's one of my closest friends, which is so funny because we met on Twitter. But after we met for coffee, she said, I thought you were a psychopath. She's like, I Googled you. And luckily you had enough of a Google presence that I was like, okay, she's not crazy. Let me meet her in person. And then we met for coffee, and we completely hit it off. And she's just another person who's just such a, warrior for social justice and stuff. And so we got along really well, and we decided to plan this fundraiser. And it turned out she's like an established musician, and she's worked with all kinds of people, and she used to be on a reality show on TV, and she's had a whole, really interesting background herself. And so we planned this fundraiser together, and that was kind of my first, taste of what I could do and how I could help. And we did this tiny fundraiser in the basement of this Upper West Side pub. The guy was nice enough. The owner of the pub, we sat him down. We told him what we wanted to do. He gave us a space for free. We got friends to volunteer. I made the free Adnan shirts because I had a fashion company. I had the ability to make shirts. And so we made the shirts, which we sold. And we ended up raising a few $1,000s in 3 hours. And so we donated that. And as the process of organizing the fundraiser was going on, I ended up talking to Rabia, and that's how I first met her. And then I ended up talking to Adnan's family, and they ended up sending us a little video to play at the fundraiser as like so somebody from Adnan's side of the family so the audience, I guess, the attendees could hear from his family. And that was really successful for just a little thing that we put together, off of a couple of tweets and a couple, coffee dates. And so I thought, I want to do more stuff like this. And then as a result of meeting Adnan's family, fast forward a couple years later, I was at Adnan's post-conviction hearing. And at his post-conviction hearing, there was a film crew, and they were filming. And the family ended up telling us, it's not public knowledge yet, so don't say anything, but, you have to sign a release because you might be in the background or whatever. But this is an HBO documentary that they're making about Adnan. And, we all know now it was Amy Berg's, the case against Adnan Syed. And when I saw that, I was so naive, and I had zero experience in filmmaking, but I did have a 20-year background in photography. So I knew my way around a camera, and I loved being behind the camera. And I was like, an HBO doc, and there's just these 3 people filming. And I was completely like out of my league. And I was like, I could do this. And I went home and promptly talked to my husband and enrolled in New York Film Academy to study documentary filmmaking, because I thought that would be the best way to reach a broader audience. And that's kind of how the ball got rolling initially.
Wow. So yeah, it just starts with a passion, and yeah, that's really cool. You make it sound like so easy. You're like, oh yeah, I just met up with some people, but I can imagine how much hard work that must have taken.
It was a lot of work, but as you guys know, because yeah, by the way, I love that you're siblings that do this podcast together.
Oh,
This
thanks.
is like, I have two brothers and this is like my dream scenario, what you guys are doing. But as you guys know, when you're super passionate about something, it doesn't feel like work, you know, you enjoy
Right.
it.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, I love that story. So what was it about Jeff's case specifically that made you want to focus on him for your documentary?
So I met Jeff. So Marion, who I did the fundraiser with for Adnan, she said she said we should have a speaker for our fundraiser, somebody who's an expert in wrongful convictions, because neither of us, have a legal background or anything of the such. And I said, sure, that's a great idea. And she was like, I met a guy at a party, and he has a really similar story to Adnan. And she said that he was also 16. He was a high school student. He was innocent, but he got wrongfully convicted of a murder of a classmate. So there was a lot of similarities. And right away, I said, yeah, absolutely, we should. And that's how I first met Jeff. He was the speaker at our fundraiser. And so when I ended up going to school a few years later, I reached out to Jeff only because he was the only person I personally knew that had been through something like this. I didn't know anybody else in my real life. And so he was the only person I thought of, and he was the first person I reached out to. And he said yes. And so we just started filming. Right away while I was at New York Film Academy still.
Oh, wow. What was the experience of making this documentary like? Like, what was it like working with Jeff, someone who had personally gone through something like this?
It was fascinating. It was very, very interesting. For me, the very first day that we were shooting at Jeff's house, the first official day, everything just felt perfect. I was like, this is where I'm meant to be. This is what I'm meant to be doing. It was exactly where I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. So it definitely felt great. There's lots of times where I was talking to Jeff, and you got to ask the tough questions, because those are the questions people want answered when they're watching a film. And there were times he got emotional, and I felt bad, for making him relive these things or putting him in a vulnerable position. But at the same time, I knew I had to ask the questions in order to get the right answers and the right information that we would have wanted in the film. The great thing about Jeff is I often joke that he talks about things that normal people wouldn't even be able to talk about. He talks about them like you just asked him what he ate for lunch. He's such an open book, and he will tell you almost anything and everything. And to me, in the beginning, it oddly felt like he could talk about these things in a very even keel, monotone way, almost removing emotion from it, which just from a psychological perspective and from like a human interest story, it was very, very fascinating to me. But Jeff, I often say, is just such a dream subject for a filmmaker because he's so open. Like, there's nothing that he won't tell you. We talked about times when he was almost killed in prison. And, we talked about how he seriously contemplated suicide, and even tried, a couple of times, like attempted suicide a couple of times. And he's just very, very open. He's very dedicated to using his experience and his story to help other people. And he's so committed to that he's willing to talk about even the very most difficult things if it's going to help somebody, which I very much appreciate. So for me, it was such a great learning experience, and B, just such a it was time so well spent. I enjoyed every minute of it.
Awesome. Okay. So I guess the last thing on this topic, do you have any advice for anyone who kind of wants to get involved in advocacy work, or anyone who wants to make like a drastic career change? Any advice in general?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one, for anybody who wants to do advocacy work and stuff like that, I think the best thing you can do is just immerse yourself in it, no matter how small you start out, because it kind of snowballs. You meet other people who are doing things in a similar field or for a similar cause, and then they give you tips and they connect you with other people and other organizations. And it's so great this day and age we live in, because you can access everything on the internet, and there's just groups for everything. There's so many groups for people who are wrongfully convicted, or people who are advocates for people who are wrongfully convicted, or whatever cause, it's near and dear to someone's heart. There's so many resources you can find and so many groups you can join. So I would definitely say just start, get involved for sure. And as far as a career change, what I did, because I realized that I had a major disadvantage at the age of 40, so what I did is I joined as many master classes as I could, and as many like people did all kinds of, whether it was longer courses or just like 1 hour webinars and things. And this was at the beginning of the pandemic. So everyone was stuck at home, and it was our initial like, oh my God, we can't go anywhere. And so it was really interesting because filmmakers who are normally so busy and would normally not have the time were also stuck at home. And so many of them were doing webinars and things that you could join, that anybody could join. And so I found it interestingly helped my career because I was able to hop on these webinars with people like Rami from the show Rami and stuff like that, and people who really know what they're doing. And you could just ask them questions and learn from their years of expertise. And I think that was really helpful. So my advice would be to learn from the people who've already done what you want to do so that you can fast track your own learning and your own career change.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I think that was kind of like us. We were always talking about true crime, and they were like, let's just start a podcast. And our first season was very much like us just kind of telling stories, but now we're like, we need to branch out. And so, yeah, here we are. So I guess, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah,
it's so great because everything's so accessible nowadays, right? Like,
I know,
whether it be online classes or, you know, people, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, and there's like podcast Facebook groups and things like that, like people that are willing to reach out and help. So yeah, it makes it a lot easier than I think it used to be.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so like I had mentioned earlier, the story of Rubin Carter was your first exposure, or one of your first, to like the world of wrongful convictions. And I think everyone kind of has that one case that stands out as their very first, like, real hard-hitting eye-opener case. For me, it was like the Amanda Knox story. I think everyone's familiar with that, how she was arrested and convicted, and she had appeals. They were overturned. She was retried, reconvicted, and then finally got exonerated. But so her story was in the media so much as it was happening, and it just got so much attention around the world. So how important is media attention in wrongfully convicted cases, and how much of a difference does it make?
You know, I'm definitely not an expert in that, so I'm not sure, because obviously it can go both ways, as you mentioned with Amanda Knox. Like, trial by media is not a good thing for anybody because they don't really get a fair shake, as you know, as Amanda obviously didn't. But I do think then there's the other side of it, like Making a Murder. There's just, the viewership was just so crazy, and then people got so hooked on his case that I think he got a lot more, not only attention, but like now he's working with Kathleen Zellner. I mean, who else would you want to work with? She's just one of the best lawyers you could have if you've been wrongfully convicted. And I don't know that she would have been on that case had he not had this documentary, or these 2 documentary series made about him. And so I think it can really go both ways, right? I obviously think that media attention can really help your case if done right, which is why I chose to go into this genre and try and give people who've been wrongfully convicted a platform so that they can share their side of the story and have a voice, you know, given back to them if they've been silenced through incarceration. But it could definitely go the other way as well. If in Amanda's case, you haven't had your trial yet, and then all of a sudden, you know, the masses start believing you did something you didn't do, that can be really, really hurtful as well.
Yeah. Would you think the negative media is like more prevalent than the positive? Or would you say there's like it's even, or what have you seen?
Yeah. You know, it's so funny because I think it's whatever world you put yourself in, right? Like, people love negative, sensationalized stories. Like, audiences love that. And so there is a lot of that put out there because obviously networks and whoever, advertisers, everybody can make money because they get more viewership that way, right? But then there's a flip side of it, like the documentary world, where most documentaries are usually, hopefully, reporting like the truth and the facts and trying to shed light on something that was either an injustice or what has something that went wrong. And so it's so funny. I feel like the people who are consuming that content can indulge in whichever direction they choose to. You know, it's almost that, like, you can listen to Fox News and believe everything you hear there, or you can listen to CNN and believe everything you hear there. And it can be the same story that's spun 2 completely different ways. And it's just really up to each individual how they choose to, and what they choose to believe, and how they choose to take it all in, you know?
Okay. Yeah. That's such a good point. I guess it's like you have to decide kind of for yourself where you want to be, I guess.
Yeah. Like, it's so funny because, like, Stephen Avery or Adnan, for example, you go online, and if you believe they're guilty, you're going to find 10,000 sites and thousands of people that are on Reddit and everywhere talking about why they're guilty. And here's all the proof that they think they have, for their side of the story. And then there's the flip side where you're going to find hundreds and thousands of people that are going to be like, they're innocent. And this is why. And so it's just wherever you choose to put your attention, it's going to kind of solidify your beliefs, I think. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's so interesting. You can watch a documentary that's very biased on one side and you can be convinced, but then you can go somewhere else and they're representing the other side and you're like, holy, like maybe not. So yes. It's really important to, definitely immerse both sides for any case, I think. Yeah. So that's definitely a really good point.
And that's why I loved like the Undisclosed podcast that Rabia did, because it had so much just like basic like facts, right? So they focused so much on like what the actual facts of the case were. And of course they were like all lawyers, so they all had that experience as well. So I think, I don't know, I really like that because it's different than just going on a forum and seeing, a random person saying like, here's why he did it or whatever, right? But like when you listen to the Undisclosed podcast, like it's hard to dispute any of that stuff, right? Because it's all legitimate.
Yes, it's all fact-based, which is so awesome. And then not only that, I find that they often on Undisclosed, they're really good about presenting the facts and stating what happened or what didn't happen. But then they also even say, some of you might think, and they'll sometimes even say the other side of their own argument and kind of explain why, that couldn't have really happened. And they use facts to outline those points, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, when I first heard about the Anon story, I have to admit that I was on, like, yes, he's guilty side. But then when I watched the documentary, I'm like, okay, that's totally changed my mind. Like, he's not guilty. He should be out of jail. Like, it was crazy because I was so convinced that he did it. But then I watched it and I was like, wow, this, like, totally changed my mind.
It's so interesting because when I listened to Serial, like I think most of the world, and they did this on purpose because they're great storytellers at NPR, but they went back and forth. I went back and forth. I would listen to an episode and I was like, oh, maybe he did it. And then I would listen to the next episode and I'd be like, no, he's innocent, and back and forth in my mind. But that's how they unfolded the story for us on purpose because they wanted to hook listeners, right? That's what they did. But there's some things that were really unfortunate in Serial. Well, let me go back a second. By the last episode, I totally believed he was innocent. But during the process, I was also kind of going back and forth debating, which is what, it was designed to do, right? That's why everybody got so hooked on it. But going back after listening to Truth and Justice or Undisclosed, then you see things in Serial that were just kind of an error. Like, for example, when Sarah Koenig and was it Ira Glass that did the drive from Adnan's high school to wherever it was, Best Buy, I think.
The Best Buy, yeah.
It was Best Buy, right? They did the drive to see if it could be done in 21 minutes or whatever the time frame was. And they ended up saying, well, it could be done if it was like you left right on time and you did all this stuff. And that was I felt like that was kind of poor, reporting or journalism, because they had that whole thing about the school buses would be blocking the parking lot and the students couldn't leave in their cars till the buses left. And anyone who's ever been to school knows that buses can't leave in 2 minutes. There's no chance the buses are pulling out in 2 minutes. And they just kind of minused that out of their equation and said, well, if the buses were gone right away, then it was totally doable in this amount of time. And I feel like what should have been said is, with the buses, even on a conservative, mathematical equation, let's say they took 6 minutes to leave and that's the fastest they could have ever left, then he couldn't have made that drive. So there were things in Serial that I felt like just weren't said the way they should have been said if they were really focused on accuracy rather than trying to hook people into a good story. And that's like my only criticism of Serial, is that they were more focused on hooking people on a good story than really, really paying attention to all the facts.
So were those kind of things like purposeful? Like they did that, to kind of make it a little bit more interesting? Or were they really like believed it?
I don't know, but it's hard for me to believe that they're smart. They're really smart people. It's hard for me to believe that they would just be like, oh, but if the bus is just left right away, it's not possible. Anyone who's been to school knows it's not possible. When I was sitting, I had a similar feeling. And of course, Sarah Koenig's super talented and she's great. I'm not comparing her to this horrible lawyer that I'm about to mention. But when we were at the post-conviction hearing, the prosecutor kept saying things like, oh, but you lied and said you were to Asia McLean, the alibi witness for Adnan. She kept saying, oh, but you guys lied and said you were at the school library, but really you were at the public library. And the public library is in the same parking lot as the school. And all the students refer to this library as the school library, which he very well knew. He's from the same city, and it was like, it was being spun a different way. And it's like the facts were kind of being left out just to make his point, which it's things like that that really bother me, because it's like, well, that's not really accurate. And you're just saying it this way because you're trying to win. And that shouldn't be the goal in any case. I mean, this is obviously Serial is just a podcast, but when you're in court, the goal shouldn't be to win. The goal should be to find the truth. And so like those things really bother me. And that one thing similarly bothered me in Serial. A couple things like that actually bothered me. And, you were saying that you thought he was guilty after you watched it. For me, it was really interesting because one of many reasons I thought Adnan's not guilty at all is people were saying, oh, he lived a double life, because at home, he was like, he went to the mosque and he was this good kid and whatever. And then at school, he was smoking weed and, whatever. And he might've stolen some money from like the donation jar at his mosque and stuff like that. And as someone who is also Pakistani and South Asian listening to this, and who was also moved to Canada with, immigrant parents, I was like, if you think living a double life makes him a murderer, then everyone I know from my community is a murderer, because like we all lived this double life. We all went to school, what was majority Caucasian, and we were the only brown kids there. And we wanted to fit in, and we drank and we did drugs and we did all that stuff. And then we, wore tank tops and whatever, went home and made sure we had our sweaters on and weren't showing any skin, and had no alcohol in the house, and would sneak out at night. And that didn't make us bad people. We were just children trying to fit in, and we were dropped into a whole different culture and a whole different society, and we wanted to fit in. And I feel like Adnan wasn't given that benefit of the doubt in the podcast, and instead that was used to paint him as like, oh, he had this double life, which wasn't the case at all. If you talk to any South Asian person who moved here with their parents, we all lived that life. That doesn't make you a bad person. You're just trying to find your way and fit in. So that really made me think yeah.
And I even mentioned, like, in the episodes that we did about the Adnan case, I had mentioned that Serial is like really good to like introduce you to the case, but there's so many other things out there that maybe present the facts in a better way. Cause like you said, it was meant to like hook people, and like, did he or didn't he, like, who, kind of like a murder mystery sort of thing.
Exactly.
So I think like that's a good starting point, but it's by no means like the main place that people should look for like the facts of that case.
For sure. And like, I'm mentioning these little things. I mean, if it wasn't for that case, Adnan wouldn't have the attention he has or the help he has. I mean, it was fantastic for him, so it's definitely more good than it is bad.
Like it was still a great thing for him, of course, right?
Yes,
like,
exactly.
It was such a success, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so Adnan had so much support from people outside of prison, but I mean, there's a lot of people who may have been wrongfully convicted that don't have that kind of support. They don't have this big story out there. They may not even have family or people to kind of like stand up for them. So who are like those people's advocates outside of prison, and like how difficult is it for lesser known cases to get a second look, especially after all appeals have been exhausted? And like, is it important for the public to get involved in things like that? And how do they even know about these kind of cases?
Yeah, they wouldn't. And it's really interesting because it seems like it's nearly impossible for these unknown cases that don't have any media attention or don't have advocates who are working for them on the outside. It's impossible. And with the justice system, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not definitely an expert in any of the legalities of it, but what I've heard from so many people is what's so challenging is that it's much easier to get a wrongful conviction than it ever is to get that overturned afterwards. So you really have to get it right the first time, because after that, it's almost nearly impossible, and you're stuck in the justice system, in the court cases and all of that. And the really scary thing is for people who are innocent, when they do come up for parole, and this is something I learned during filmmaking, is when they come up for parole, if they don't show remorse and they don't say, I'm sorry for what I did and I'm a changed person, or maybe I did this because of my circumstances at the time, but now I would be a good member of society. If they don't say things like that, they get denied parole. And the crazy thing about that is if you assert your innocence, you get denied parole because they say you're not showing remorse for what you did. Like, we know you're guilty. They start from that point where they're like, you've been convicted, we know you're guilty. And so for innocent people, it really, it's kind of like a double-edged sword. It just hurts them more and more in the future and in the parole process, which is so sad because most of them, because they're innocent, don't want to say they did this horrific thing they didn't do, even if it means it's going to help them get out of jail 10, 20 years down the road. They still want to assert their innocence, which is the one thing they have to hold on to. So it's a really, broken system in terms of wrongful convictions.
Yeah, like it's oh, sorry. I was just going to say, like, it is wild to think, like, admit you're guilty and you may get out on parole, but say you're innocent and then you won't. Like, it's so twisted to just think of it that way.
Yeah. And as an innocent person, can you even imagine the mental hell that would be, where you're just kind of trapped in this thing and nobody will believe you? And, you have to lie and say you did this horrific thing in order to even have a chance at someone looking at your case to get out in the future. It's so messed up. I can't imagine how people who come out of it, which is why Jeff's case and Adnan's case and Reuben Carter's case are so fascinating to me. How do they come out eventually and then be so nice and forgiving and not bitter and not angry? And, and in all three of those cases, all three of them have said that they're not angry and they're not bitter, and it's amazing to me.
Yeah. I remember we had talked about this in one of our episodes, just how kind of broken the system is that way, and how backwards it kind of is. And I just can't imagine like the hopelessness and the helplessness some people must feel. And and once they get out, how, they're able to, like, I don't know, just like reimagine their lives and be happy and move forward. So it's really, exemplifies like strength for real.
It does. And it's strength I don't think I would have, but all these people seem to have it.
Yeah. And that's what actually something in your documentary that one of the things that struck me was when he mentioned it was like a week after he got out was when he decided that he wasn't going to spend his life being angry or bitter. And he was just, and to me, that's so crazy. Like, there's people out there who are a lot angrier for a lot less reason, right? Like, he has reasons to be angry and bitter. So the fact that he can, like, have the strength to just make that decision, is really, like, admirable.
It is. It's admirable. It's almost unbelievable, but there must be something about this. I've thought about this just, to myself before, that there must be something about this experience of wrongful conviction that really puts everything into perspective for you. And that's why you become this person who's not bitter and not angry. And because it seems like almost everybody that I've ever either known, like Jeff, or read about or heard speak, like Adnan or whatnot, say the same thing. And everyone who's never been in prison who I talk to about it says, oh, I would be so angry. And I think I would be angry too, but it seems like most of the people who went through it aren't. So there must be something about the experience that really, gets them, puts life into perspective, and they're thankful for just having their life back and for being alive. And, like Jeff says, he enjoys just like the sun on his face. He enjoys just being outside because he wasn't able to even go outside. I think it's in the short doc that you guys watched. It might be in the feature because now I've been working on it for so long, it all kind of meshes together in my head. But Jeff said that after a while, he stopped even going outside for his rec time, because he said that just being put in handcuffs and like the whole physical like body search and all that was not worth the little bit of time he got outside. And so he just gave that up too. So, it's no wonder he enjoys life and being outdoors so much now.
Yeah, I do remember that. So I think it was in the short doc. So yeah, it's crazy to think about. So you had provided us with like a stat that over 100,000 innocent people have been convicted of a crime that they didn't commit and they are in prison for it. So I'm just curious, like, where that number came from, and is that like in the States? Is that overall? I imagine it's like extrapolated from a bunch of different places. So yeah, like, where did that stat come from?
Yeah, so that statistic is actually a very conservative number, and it's what the Innocence Project has reported in the US. So that's just for America. And they say about 2.5% to I think 5% of the US prison population is innocent. So that's about 100 to 120,000 people. And that's the most conservative number out of all the organizations that kind of do assessments for these kind of statistics. There's other organizations, like if you ask Jeff, for example, there's other organizations that say it's closer to 10, I think 10 to 15%. So if you go by those numbers, you can just imagine what, a large number of people that would be. And it's crazy because I often think this and say this, that people who haven't been personally impacted by wrongful conviction, most people don't think of it as a cause that they need to get behind, or a cause that, you would like world hunger and things like that you would just, everyone is aware of, that it happens in certain countries and stuff like that. Wrongful convictions, I don't think is on most people's radar unless they've been personally impacted or they've been affected by, watching a movie or listening to a podcast, and they get really, behind a cause. And it's crazy to think that, let's say it's 100,000 people, let's say it's triple that, like other organizations say it's 300,000 people. That many people being wrongfully convicted and in prison impacts not only those people, but their entire families, and then any of their friends and their, wives, children, spouses. It's a lot of people that would be impacted by just this 2 to 5% who are wrongfully convicted, if it's even that low. And I think it's a really important cause to get behind. And that's why I love doing these films, because I think it raises awareness just to average person who may not think of this as being a big problem in any country, Canada, the States, or anywhere else.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. And so that would just be like the number of people who have maybe like written to the Innocence Project. There could be others who maybe think they have no hope and haven't even asked for help at all. So that, right, there still could be like a lot on that side maybe.
Yeah,
as well.
It could be a much higher number for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you know anything about like the patterns in the demographics for those who are wrongfully convicted? And like, is there a disproportionate bias toward any specific demographic?
There is. I think it's African American men. I think, I don't have the statistic in front of me, and we'll have to Google it.
So yeah, while you're looking that up, like you said, it was African American men. So, I mean, with that's probably like systematic racism probably has a lot to do with that. But would you say like interpersonal or like personal racism has a lot to do with that as well? Like, I mean, people that are, like lower income or immigrants and stuff kind of have less resources. So they would be a kind of a target for that kind of thing. So what would you say are the factors behind that?
I'm definitely not an expert in this area, so I don't want to speak to something that I wouldn't, be the best person to answer these questions. But definitely people who have less means and less income really get railroaded by the system. Like, for example, just what I know about Jeff's case, his mom was a single mom. She had another son who was younger than Jeff. And so when Jeff got into this whole mess, it was very hard for her because she couldn't afford a lawyer. And so he got a court-appointed lawyer, and that lawyer did not do a good job at all. Ended up, I think, leaving the case early on, and they got another court-appointed lawyer, and the lawyer just wasn't good. And that, of course, impacted the result of Jeff's case, a court case. And then look what he had to go through because of it. Had they had the means and the money to hire a top lawyer, maybe Jeff wouldn't have spent any time in prison. There was DNA evidence to show his innocence. But if he had had a lawyer who was competent enough to, use the evidence to show Jeff's innocence, then he might not even have gone through this. And that happens to a lot of people, who don't have the money to put up a good defense for themselves.
I was going to say, like, I find it really frustrating, like, when you don't have money for a lawyer and then they give you one, but they give you like the bare minimum lawyer. They don't give you like the best lawyer they can have. I find that really frustrating for people who like, oh, it's because you can't afford one, we're just going to give you whoever out there.
Yes.
It really makes me angry. Like, why not give them the better chance like everybody else? Why give them like a shitty lawyer because they don't have money? Why put them through that? I find it so frustrating.
Like they're already starting behind the, just from the very beginning with the lawyer that they're given, right?
Yeah.
That's just my little rant. I just find it really I always find it frustrating. Like for people who just don't have that money, they just be like, okay, well, you're already behind. You don't have enough money for whatever, so we're just gonna give you whoever out there.
Yeah,
It's just so annoying.
It is. It's terrible. There's so many things in the system, the justice system, that could be corrected. Oh, and the statistic I was talking about earlier, it's innocent Black people are 7 times more likely to be wrongfully convicted of murder than innocent white people. And I mean, 7 times, and it's like, 700% greater chance. I thought it was 5, so I'm glad I looked it up, because it's actually 7. And it's terrible.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, so I guess like racism came up a little bit in Adnan's case, for both Adnan and Jay, I guess. Like, so Jay's situation, he was interrogated by white police. He was a Black teenager, and they kind of threatened him with, we could transfer this case to the nenext county, and there's the death penalty there. So I think that came up as well. How is Jay's situation and like confessions similar to Jeff's confession that ultimately led to his conviction? Like, are there patterns in these two cases, and patterns like in general that come up in false confessions?
There are. Again, I'm not an expert in this, so I would, I don't want to misspeak to any of this, but there's a couple of things that I've learned through the filmmaking process, actually, which have been really interesting. One is when police or detectives are interviewing people, and the person they're interviewing doesn't have any more facts or information than what the police already had. That's a really good sign that the person is not the right person. They're only reiterating what you've already, like what the cops have already told them, and they're reiterating it in their own words or, slightly differently, but there's no new facts in what they're saying. And that was definitely the case for Jay, because Jay didn't know anything. He was just saying what the cops told him to say. And in Jeff's case, it's very different, because of course, they were coercing a false confession out of Jeff. They were manipulating Jay to say what they wanted so they could pin it on Adnan. So it's slightly different. But in Jeff's case, they fed Jeff a lot of details. They actually almost groomed Jeff for a couple of months. They took Jeff around to the crime scene. They told him and showed him all kinds of details about the case so that he would have this information. And they did it over time. And he was only 16, 16, you're not smart enough to navigate these things. And the day that they got the false confession out of Jeff, they didn't tell anyone where they were taking him. He didn't have a lawyer present. His mom didn't know where he was. They didn't take him to the normal police station. They took him out of county to somewhere he'd never been before. They took him early morning, and he had no food. They interrogated him for 7 hours, 7.5 hours, I believe. And they fed him coffee the whole day. Jeff said he had never had coffee in his life. So it was his first time. And he said he was really jittery, which that's what happens when I drink coffee, because I'm not a coffee drinker. And so he said he had no food. He was starving. He was scared. These cops that had pretended to be his friends for the last 2 months, because I guess the cops had said, you can help us solve this case because you know the kids at school, and you knew Angela, who was murdered. And so they kind of painted this picture that Jeff could be like this, detective, like helping out the big guys kind of thing. And Jeff's dream back then was to be a cop. So he said he was really taken by this, because he was like, oh, it's an opportunity to work with real police officers, and so he went with them, not knowing that they were really just grooming him to pin it on him. And then that day, after 7.5 hours, they said, just tell us what we want to hear. Like, tell us that you did it, and we'll let you go home. And he said that after all that time, he just broke down, and he thought they'll really take him home. And so they just said what he wanted them to say. In Jay's case, it was very different, because they told Jay, like, we could pin this on you pretty much, but you're going to tell us what we want you to tell us about Adnan, and then you're going to get off. And then Jay had a laundry list of other offenses, and they think they helped him get off on all those charges as well. He had I think he's had assault on a police officer and all kinds of other major things that he's never done any time for, because he has some kind of deal, I think, going on. And so Jay did it for his own benefit, right? Whereas Jeff was very different, because he was a kid that was just being kind of railroaded by these detectives.
Is that considered police misconduct now? Like, is that like a normal thing they could do? Or was that like, no, we probably shouldn't do that anymore?
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing that happens often, unfortunately. Definitely, they shouldn't do it. I know that in some states, and I don't know which ones off the top of my head, but just very recently, some states passed laws where the police aren't allowed to lie to the person that they're interviewing in order to get them to say stuff. Because in all of these situations, the police have lied to the person they're interviewing, saying, "Oh, we already know that this happened, so just tell us," or "We already saw that there was, like they told Jeff, like, you failed the lie detector test, so we know that you did it." But none of that was true. They were just saying that to him to freak him out and be like, I think they told him something like, "You already told us you did it through the result of the lie detector test. So now we just need to hear you say it out loud," so that they could just have it, have the confession. And so they're not, in some states, there's finally laws being passed that they're not allowed to do those types of things. But in many states, that's still allowed, which is, again, so bizarre.
I always thought that was crazy that they could make a story up and then tell that to the person, like, "Oh, someone saw you," or, "Your DNA is there," when it's not true at all. Like, I find that that's crazy. That's even still legal.
It is. It's crazy that that's legal because, like in Jeff's case, and the other thing is that prosecutors and police have immunity, that they don't get charged with anything, and that's also crazy because they're essentially committing a crime themselves. They're committing a crime by pinning this on an innocent person and putting them in jail for something they didn't do when they full well know, like, Jeff didn't do this. That is a crime, but there's no consequences for them, and I think that's part of what makes them keep doing it over and over. If they were scared that they themselves could end up in jail because they did this to somebody, then I think there would be a lot of more self-policing going on and they wouldn't do it as often, right? Because they've seen what jail's like. They don't want to go there.
Yeah, I'm surprised there's not stricter laws for police officers and those kind of things. Because I know in Jeff's case, like, there was blatant police misconduct regarding, like, the DNA evidence that came out. Like, the police made a deal with the medical examiner to lie about why the reason there was no DNA from Jeff. And so, like, that came out. That's not allowed.
The way the system works, they just got off scot-free and did all the damage they did to Jeff's life. But then when Jeff actually got out, which, most people don't get out. So it's a very small percentage of time that this even happens. But when Jeff finally got out, he took them to civil court and he won. I mean, but there was that 16, 17 years, 18 years later, but they've already had a whole career they've already done because they were adults when they did it to Jeff at 16, right? Yeah. It's terrible. It's terrible.
It really is. Like, I'm trying to wrap my head around why. Like, do you think they knew Jeff was innocent and they were just kind of push this along? Because, like, if they knew he wasn't, then there's somebody out there that could do this again, right? Like, why would that not be their main concern?
Yeah, they absolutely had to know, because if they didn't know, they wouldn't have asked the medical examiner to lie, right? Because then they would have been like, "Oh, wait, the DNA doesn't match. Oh, crap. Let us go see who it does match, or let us use this great evidence that we have to try and solve this case." But they didn't. They were like, "Okay, let's hide that information." So they had to have known, right? And I can only speculate because, of course, they still stick by the story till this day and say that they thought Jeff really did it because, of course, they're not going to admit that they're corrupt. But I think they absolutely knew, for one. And for two, I've always thought the exact same thing you said. It's like, why would they want this murder on the streets? And the crazy thing is, Peekskill, where this happened, was a super safe town. I think they hadn't had any homicide in over 2 decades. And they lived in this town. So if for no other reason but to just keep your own town safe and your own family safe, wouldn't you want to get the murderer off the streets? And that has always just really boggled my mind, because I would think, you chose to be a police officer in your city. Don't you want to keep your city safe? That just seems like a no-brainer. But obviously they were more concerned with solving the case and getting promotions and their own personal gain than keeping the city safe and the real murderer off the streets.
Wow. Yeah. I guess it's like, it's good for their career. They get a fast arrest, rather than keeping the public safe. Like, it's crazy to me.
Yeah.
Like, the DNA, they tested that again. It was years later, and that's what got Jeff out, because they found who really did it. When there's new advances in technology for these kind of cases, would they automatically put older DNA for older cases, or would somebody have to kind of be like, test this again? Or is it like an automatic thing? Do you know anything about that?
I don't know, but I'm almost sure it's not an automatic thing. Somebody has to say, test this again. They're so reluctant to do these things automatically, it seems, in the States anyways, because it'll just inundate the court system and they can't handle it. They can't, they just can't go back and be like, oh, we got to check all of these again, which is so unfortunate because it's people's lives. But I don't think any of that happens automatically, except for, like right now, and this is impacting Adnan's case, so you guys might know this already, but in Maryland, a law just recently passed that juvenile offenders who got life can be resentenced because that's inhumane or something like along those lines. And so that is actually, kind of, I don't want to say automatic, but anybody who was underage at the time of their conviction can now request this and, get back in the court system. So, but again, I think it has to be initialized by the person who was convicted. They won't just automatically do it for everybody.
Oh, okay.
I think. Yeah.
So, and Jeff was tried as an adult, even though I think he's 16 in New York. You're considered an adult in the court system. I think I was watching another thing with Jeff, and I think he'd mentioned 16 or 17, you're considered an adult.
Oh, okay.
But like, how do I make that determination between, we're going to try you as an adult, or we're just going to try you as a kid?
I don't know.
Where's that line?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know at all. I know that I don't even know about the law in New York that you were mentioning, but I know that when the crime occurred for Jeff, like when the real killer killed Angela, Jeff was 16. By the time he was in court and went to prison, he was 17. So I don't know what the age is to be considered an adult in New York, but I know it happens all the time. Like I'm sure you guys know in Adnan's case, for example, even his birth date was written wrong. So they for a while they thought he was 18. I mean, it's ridiculous, but he was also tried as an 18-year-old, not a 17-year-old, and things like that. So unfortunate.
Wow. So yeah, I think we're almost wrapped up here with our last questions. We're right on time too. Are there any resources available for prisoners once they get out of jail in terms of like rehabilitation or life skills assistance, and specifically any that are focused on those who have been wrongfully convicted?
There isn't. And that's one of the really challenging things. People get out of prison, especially people who are innocent, and they're so looking forward to the life they've been wanting, which is to be out of prison. And then they get out and they don't have money. They don't have a place to live. They don't have anywhere to go. For a lot of them, they've lost contact with all their friends and sometimes even family because they're in there for so long, and it becomes so difficult to stay in touch and to visit them. And you got to go through the whole process of getting into a prison, which, is not fun at all, I'm sure. And then in a lot of cases, the prisoners are moved around from prison to prison to prison. And so sometimes they're moved to others, hours and hours away outside of their cities. And so family members can't always visit. So a lot of them lose contact with even family. And then when they get out of prison, they have nothing, which is in a lot of cases why they end up, back to a life of crime, or not even back to a life of crime, sometimes just a new life of crime, or sometimes homeless or what have you, because there are no resources, unfortunately, for most people.
It's almost like getting out of prison is half the battle. And then once you're out, another whole other battle starts. And
yes, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I guess you wouldn't have any, especially in Jeff's case, like you go when you're 17, you don't ever really have any like work experience, you don't have college, you don't have like that communication skills that you would have. So yeah, I can't imagine how tough that would be. It's really unfortunate.
Jeff said he was like literally on the verge of becoming homeless, except for then he got into a college that gave him a scholarship, I think, and they ended up giving him very, very inexpensive dorm room to stay in. Otherwise, he said he was about to be homeless himself.
Wow.
Yeah.
Jeff's story is so amazing.
Yeah, it's a remarkable story for sure.
I just had one, I guess probably the final question, but
Sure.
Is there anything you can tell us about like the feature length documentary? Like what other things you'll be exploring in the future?
Yeah. So as you guys know, when you watch the short documentary, it really focused on Jeff's reintegration into society. And really the one main question I was trying to answer is, what is it like for an innocent person to re-enter society after they get out of prison? And how did that impact his, future life, everything that happened after he was released? The feature length doc is, an hour and a half long, and it goes much deeper into how this happened, why this happened, how do people give false confessions when, they are admitting to something they didn't do, and the psychology behind that. And I got to talk to some really great experts and people from the Innocence Project about this, and it was fascinating. We talked to the lawyers who actually got Jeff out, who work at the Innocence Project. And so we get to hear about what that process was like for them and for Jeff, like both sides, what the Innocence Project was doing while Jeff was still in prison, and what his first day out was like. And then we go into detail about the DNA and why it wasn't allowed to be tested, because Jeff had been asking for years for it to be tested, and he was denied every time. And at the time, the Westchester DA was Janine Pirro, and she denied Jeff's DNA testing over and over again. If it had been tested the first time he asked, I think Jeff would have saved a good 5 years off of his prison time. But so we go into that, like when there's DNA available, why does the justice system not allow these people to have it tested? And why is there even an opportunity for someone to say no? Like why shouldn't it just automatically be tested? So it just goes a lot deeper into not only Jeff's personal life, but the justice system and how this happened and why this occurs.
Wow. Is that going to be available in Canada?
It's so funny that you asked that. I would love for it all to be available in Canada. And this is such a longer conversation, but Canada it's been such a weird thing for me being Canadian, living in the States. Canada has these Canadian broadcast laws. And I fall like in this weird loophole where they're not considering me Canadian as far as the content I create goes, because I've lived in the States. But yet I'm not American. I don't have American citizenship. I'm only Canadian. And so I fall into this weird place where they don't consider my content Canadian.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yes. So I've had a hard time getting broadcasted here, which I'm still working on. So I hope to have both the short and the feature broadcasted in Canada, if and when I can get that done.
Yeah, and sorry, I know I said the other one was the final question, but I did just want to ask this.
Oh, that's okay.
One final. I guess if there was like one overarching like message from the documentary or from Jeffrey's story that you could just kind of like, what is like the overall message you would just say?
Oh God, there's so many. I guess Jeff's story in particular. I guess there's two things. For me, on a personal level, the whole reason I started making this documentary and told Jeff's story is because I wanted to help people like Adnan, people who are in Adnan's position. And so my personal goal is to help people who are currently incarcerated wrongfully and help tell their stories, or in any way that I can assist them, even if it's just giving them a platform to tell their side of the story. That's really what I want to do. And that's the message I want to convey is those people's message, and see how like the public and other people can help them. And as far as Jeff goes and my documentary goes, I think the biggest thing that I always take away from it and the message is that there's just so much perseverance, and Jeff just has so much heart. And I love this human triumph story, that no matter what you're put in, whatever position you're put into, like Jeff was just put in the worst position, worst place ever, but he came out of it not only freeing himself, but becoming this like champion and advocate for so many other people, and just doing such great things with his life. And I just love that message, and that's like Jeff's life message, I think. And it's so admirable. And I think he's just done such an amazing job. And so he's done so much with so little, and something most people I don't think could do and could accomplish.
Yeah. So Katie, was that all the questions you had? Or Stephanie, did you have anything?
No, I just want to say it was really interesting hearing your like side of things. Like that's why I didn't really talk much, because I'm so interested into what you had to say. Like it was really good. I really enjoyed your interview and your talk. It was really good.
Thanks, guys.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks so much. Good luck with everything. We look forward to seeing what else you do.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I'll definitely share it with you guys.
Okay.
Even before it broadcasts, I can share it with you guys.
Oh, awesome.
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And yeah, sorry I didn't have too many of them. I never want to present myself as an expert in this, because I'm not. So I didn't know a lot of the facts and stuff that you're asking. I wish I did. So I hope I didn't let you down there.
Oh, no. No, it was great.
It was a good discussion, right? Like even, it's good to just hear your perspective. Like, if you're not an expert, but to hear your perspective from like the filmmaking side too, right?
Yeah,
for
definitely.
sure. For sure.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure. For sure, you guys. It was a pleasure. And let's keep in touch, whether on email or social or wherever.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Sounds good.
So, very special thank you to our guest, Jia Wertz. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come and chat with us on our podcast. So, you can follow Jia on Instagram at GiaDocs. You can also visit her website at jiawertz.com to get some more information on the film and check out some of the other stuff that she's doing. And if you're in the US, you can watch Conviction, the short documentary that we referenced in this episode. It is on Amazon Prime in the US, and hopefully it will be distributed in Canada soon. And you can look out for the full-length feature of the same story coming out later in the year. Thank you so much for listening in on our 3-part premiere episode. We really hope you enjoyed listening. We hope that you learned something about this case, and we are very excited that we were able to interview 2 very key people in this story and in the telling of this story, and we're very excited about that. And we have so much more coming up for you this season on Crime Family, so look forward to other guests in the future, and we're going to have some really good conversations, and we're going to tackle some really interesting topics and some really intriguing cases in the coming weeks. So once again, thank you so much for listening for this 3-parter. We hope you enjoyed it. And as always, you can follow us on Instagram at Crime Family Podcast. We're on Twitter at Crime Family Pod 1. And we do have Facebook as well. You can follow us, our Facebook page at Crime Family Podcast. And we do have a Gmail account. So you can, if you have any case suggestions or some feedback for us, definitely send us an email at crimefamilypodcast@gmail.com. Thank you so much for all of your support over the first season and over the hiatus, and we hope that support continues as we continue to cover interesting cases and bring you some good content. So thank you so much. Take care, and we'll see you next week.